Spoilers ahead for The Deer Hunter. Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Screenwriters Rewatch. Today, I'm joined by John as we delve into The Deer Hunter. We were trying to come up with a clever, fun intro, but it's just... Let's just not do that.
It's just one of those films. Yeah.
It's just one of those films. It really is. But before we get into it properly, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, pop over to our website, thescriptdepartment.net, have a look at what we're up to over there, and you can check out our other episodes of Screenwriters Rewatch on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, etc., etc. And John, do you like coffee?
Yeah, I enjoy a nice espresso. You can.
You enjoy a nice espresso?
You can. Is there a link where people can buy us a coffee?
You know, John, it's funny you should mention that because you can find us to buy us a coffee in the description of this episode, in either on YouTube or in the show notes. I'm sure you'll be able to find us there. So if you fancy an espresso for John, or perhaps a nice, I prefer like a mocha, I quite like chocolate, then that'd be great.
Or the money is fine.
That's fine too. We can go ahead and do that. That's nice. Just helps us to keep things ticking over here, so we can keep bringing you interesting conversations on films such as The Deer Hunter. John,
yay!
How
such fun viewing this film is.
You know, I thought when I was going through it, you know, let's go for an American classic. This Oscar worthy. Titan, Oscar winner, you know, Robert De Niro, Meryl Streep, incredible cast. It's a tough watch. It's a tough watch. What are you bringing to this rewatch? What baggage comes with you in this episode of Deer Hunter?
You know, I watched it. I came very late to it in my kind of film education, and when I watched it, I could see the brilliance of it. I could see why it's on those lists, and I got it. You know, I get why this is considered a masterpiece. I think from a filmmaking point of view, you know, acting, general direction. I think there are issues with the direction in parts, but generally speaking, I think this is a real triumph of cinema, and I get why it's there. I think there's 2 hours of absolute pure genius cinema in this 3-hour film, if that makes sense. And I think it's worth watching the 3 hours to get those, let's say, 2 hours of gold. But I do think there is a lot of kind of fat on the bone that needs to be trimmed off in order for this to really hit its kind of pure storytelling perfection that it deserves. And I'm only noticing that it now in my second time watching this film.
Yeah.
And I'm realizing why I didn't go back to that film in the maybe 10 years when I first saw it, when I didn't. I mean, like I said, I came to it quite late. 10 years is probably pushing, actually. It's probably more 15 years. But it's not a fun movie to watch. And I know the subject matter says it shouldn't be fun. But I enjoy watching Platoon. I enjoy watching Apocalypse Now. I can lose myself in those films. This is a very, very tough film to lose yourself in, I think.
It is. I found myself acutely aware of how much time was passing. Interestingly, I know you mentioned that you had the time code up as you were watching.
Yeah, I was interested. Points. Yeah, I was interested from a screenwriting point of view this time, obviously for the podcast, and so I watched it with the time code on to see like how much time are they devoting to the, you know, that wedding at the beginning is a long wedding, and I wondered just how long is this wedding? You know, how long is the Vietnam stuff? How long is the you know, returning home? There's a clear 3 acts to this story. How appropriately paced are these acts? You know, your first act should be, or your second act should be half the length of the overall film. You know, in traditional kind of screenwriting structure, and you can set your watch to most of the great Hollywood masterpieces in that way. You can when the first act ends, you can set your watch to when the film will end. It's that well kind of structured. This is not like that at all. It's quite all over the place, and you know, judging by the time, you know, going by the time code and where those act breaks are and things. Um,
Yeah, I sensed that. I didn't have the time code up, but I certainly picked up on that. You sort of the wedding sequence, the first act, as you know, we'll describe it. The wedding sequence, the introduction of everybody before they go to Vietnam, is I think okay. So baggage for me that I'm bringing to this, just to lay it down, so we're kind of on the same page. I watched this film probably 10 years ago when I was doing my undergraduate degree, and I watched it for performance. So I watched it for De Niro, Streep, these kind of powerhouse performances, and they are. I think they really do stand up. And there's a really interesting thing they do with dialogue, which we'll talk about in a little while. But so I didn't consider structure at the time. I didn't really think about that. So then coming into it this time, I now am acutely aware, I think, of the reason why that structure is different, and I think that they do it to deliberately make it a tough watch. I mean, that hard cut between um acts 1 and 2, where you have the beautiful piano sequence and they're all kind of mournfully sitting there, the deep breath before the plunge, and then boom, bang, civilians are dead. This is happening. This is happening. This is happening. It is, so I was chatting to somebody about this the other day, and they described it as an assault, and it really, really is an assault. And I think that but I think it's supposed to be, so I'm a little more forgiving of perhaps the stepping outside of those traditional screenwriting structural ideas, because I think it's done deliberately, and I think you spend all that time sat there with them to get to know them, so that it then hurts so much more when you see them pulled apart across those subsequent 2 acts. And
the the
I think it's
film.
effective in that sense.
Oh, absolutely. And I will say, like, for every criticism I have over the general pacing of the and I do think there is a kind of a clumsiness to how drawn out some of the stuff is. For me, it's worth it to have the beautiful reconciliation between Meryl Streep and De Niro then later, or the tragedy of seeing what's happened to Stephen, in the hospital, or to see, where Nick has been taken, where Nick's life has now gone. I think Michael Cimino does a wonderful job of establishing all of those relationships so well. The question of whether or not he needed an hour and 9 minutes to do that, and that's how long it is before they go to Vietnam, is we hear about them leaving for Nam. The very first scene is them saying goodbye to their co-workers at the plant.
Mm-hmm.
Give them hell, boys, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Kill one of them for me, I think, is one of the lines, really problematic lines.
Yeah, for
and
sure.
it's that's the very, very, like, kicking off point of this movie, and it's an hour and 9 minutes before anything resembling before that turning point happens, before they actually head off. But to get just to and by the way, the running time is exactly 3 hours. Like, it is exactly 3 hours to like the minute when you remove the credits. And when they break out of the prison camp and they manage to get back home, like, or when they get back to when their war ends, let's say. I know the argument is the war never ends for them, but when they're, let's say, out of immediate harm's way, I think it's when Michael puts Stephen up on the roof of on the bonnet of the Jeep as it drives away, and he's kind of, okay, he's safe now, he'll get medical treatment. That is the halfway mark of the movie.
Yeah.
So there is an attempt, there is a clear symmetry trying to take. They're trying to do symmetry in this movie, where the let's say the halfway mark of the movie is a turning point. It's the beginning of Act 2B, let's say, but it doesn't work because the rest of the movie is so out of sync. Like, really, if you really want to do kind of traditional screenwriting structure, you've got to be, and this was written by people who are clear, advocates of that structure. It's not like
Oh,
we're
of
talking about
course.
a
Yeah.
bunch of art house filmmakers here it would be unfair to to judge them on that if that's not what their style is. But their style is typically that. And so really what you're looking at is maybe 45 minutes before they go off to war, and then the halfway mark of the movie is the war. They're out of danger, and then it's a decline from there on. This is not that. It is quite disjointed in terms of its structure. The other argument I would say is, you said you were forgiving of. I'll stop talking here, but you said you were forgiving of it. I think you can achieve all of the things that we've just said, like the wonderful coming together of these characters at the beginning, and the real tragic kind of conclusion then to where these friends are by the end. You can do all of that in a 2-hour movie, and people have done that in a 2-hour movie. People have done that in a 90-minute film. You don't need 3 hours. Michael Cimino is a very self-indulgent filmmaker. Go watch Heaven's Gate if you haven't. It is laughable how indulgent it is. That film
Right.
bankrupted United Artists.
Yeah.
And you can see that here. And this was my first time watching The Deer Hunter after knowing what Cimino did with Heaven's Gate and the whole kind of debacle of that production. And I'm seeing shades of that here.
Yeah, that's really. I hadn't put that together. I knew about the Heaven's Gate situation, but I didn't know. I hadn't connected this film with that director for some reason.
Go watch that wedding sequence.
Yeah,
and then tell me. Yeah. Guess what film this guy's going to make next? Like it's so obvious.
I get what you're saying. I think that that initial, I really enjoyed the first act of this, and in all its self-indulgence, because I think that for me it was probably because I knew what was coming, and this is the difficult thing, is to try and watch it as if you haven't watched it before, and to try and see this, because I found on the rewatch, watching that and the tension of knowing what was coming, that it just built and built and built and built and built, and you just, because every time, that wonderful conversation that Nick and Mike have, bring me home if you get lost, and he does, and that he does later on, and it comes kind of quite near the end of that. And I think that you are right, you are absolutely right. You could do this in 2 hours 90 minutes, but I kind of love that they didn't, in a weird way, in a really masochistic way, in a really sort of, I'm willing to sit there and put myself through this and to feel the pain of those characters. I do think it deepens the agony that you feel for them, and I do think it deepens the pain of it. And
that is the dichotomy here, is that you are, I completely understand that if you were to write it if you were to condense it, if you were to take that 2 hours worth of gold that I think is in there, you would lose the dimensions that the characters have. I think you would lose the relationships, the strength of those relationships. There is these are people who work in a plant. They're forging. They're building, with their hands, and it does feel like that whole first act is building this friendship, building this bond between these friends, and then you could make the argument, it only takes a small sliver of the war to then shatter all that.
This is kind of an interesting point, is that I was surprised on this time around how little of the war we actually see.
Yeah,
and I really like that. Another film might have shown them going through basic training and then going into this, and a lot more of the kind of conversations with. I think they do that really well in, what is it, the not the Pacific, Band of Brothers. They do that really well in the Band of Brothers TV series, the basic training and the kind of growth, and the veterans coming back through, and the new guys going in and kind of, oh man, I don't think this is really what I signed up for, and all of that kind of stuff. They do that so well there. But I think it's a really brave decision to not do that, and to jump straight into it and to hard cut in there. I think it's really effective. But you're right, you see so little of this film. You see so little of the war in this film, and and it does completely derail everything. It changes everybody, changes everything. Interestingly, I did learn in the little bit of research I did in between finishing this, because, I mean, full disclosure for you guys, both of us finished this only about an hour ago. We just happened to watch it just straight before. And so in the little slither of research, it turns out there was no Russian roulette played in Vietnam during that time period. That's an invented thing. And I get why, because it works so perfectly for this whole idea. And apparently, this original screenplay was, in its original form, was actually set in Vegas and was something very, very different.
Yeah,
to what it
see that I'm glad you told me that, because look, I'm sure there is some record somewhere of that happening in a prison camp somewhere, because
Probably.
it is, because that, you know, but the idea that this was some sort of a pastime for people in Vietnam is
like a cultural thing. Yeah,
it's really just hard to swallow, you know.
Yeah.
And I know people will say, yeah, but there's evidence of this or evidence of that, maybe. But that just because it may have happened doesn't mean it's going to be credible on screen. I'm sure there are people who
Absolutely,
fall in huge distances and survive. That doesn't mean that if your action hero does it, that audiences are going to swallow that. You know. So I'm so glad you brought that up, because I have a big problem with the Russian roulette in this. I think the Russian roulette has come to define this movie. It's the poster of the movie. It's the thing that's been parodied. Like, I've seen it parodied in The Simpsons, where Mo Sizlak has a Russian roulette game going on with ex-Vietnamese soldiers and stuff like that in his basement or something. Like, it's you know, it has been parodied quite a lot, and I think to me, it's the weakest thing in this film, because the Russian roulette in the prison camp is horrific and also brilliantly evil in its conception, right? In the sense that these are guards who were probably told, torture these soldiers. When you've got what you need, shoot them all. And these guys are probably sick of sitting here in this riverbank with nothing to do, and they're probably thinking, how can we make execution more entertaining? And they come up with this game. Like, that's what I'm imagining when I'm watching that horrific scene, because nobody survives. Like, when you first see De Niro in that cage under the cabin in the water, it is filled to the brim with people.
Yeah.
And
very quickly dissipates.
Very quickly is that number whittled down to just our three: Stephen, Nick, and Michael. And even Stephen is just a shell of his former self by that point. Now, that all has real credibility to it, because it is not meant to be something that people survive. It is just an entertaining way of executing people for these evil soldiers, right? Fast forward then to Saigon, and you've got this whole underground gambling ring predicated on people, lots of people surely, wanting to either gamble on this sport, I say sport loosely, or people wanting to participate.
Yeah.
And it's just not believable, because the odds of survival, sports are successful because the rate of survival has to outweigh the rate of death, right? And Christopher Walken is on a winning streak because he's sending money back to Stephen. And so the implication is that this guy is like an undefeated champion of the underground Russian roulette ring in Vietnam, which is just not at all believable. The odds, the averages, the law of averages are not in his favor.
No, not at all. Not at all.
And the idea that they've built this whole the legacy of this film is built around something that is fundamentally flawed from a writing point of view.
It does thematically undercut that sequence in the in the torture sequence as well, in a big way, because you take this, and I did think that it's a great sequence. It's a very well shot, very well written, very well delivered sequence at the end there. But it does, as I was looking at it, I was kind of thinking, well, this does somewhat undercut the power of that torture sequence, because yes, it comes from there, and there's a great flip there where Mike is saying to Christopher Walken's character, I can't remember his name now. Nick, thank you. Yeah, well, he's saying to Nick during the torture sequence, "Do it, do it, do it. You got to do it. You got to do it." And then you get to this end point, and he's going, "Don't do it, don't do it, don't do it."
Yeah,
And
yeah.
there is a really wonderful reverse. It's very well structured and very well thought out in that sense. And also, he says, Mike says to him at one point, "Oh, one shot. It's the one shot kill." Things like that, and then that's then echoed as part of his hunting ideology. That's then echoed later. There's a lot of great stuff going on there, but I think as an idea, you're right, it doesn't really hold a lot of water, and it also completely thematically undercuts the power of that sequence, because if everyone's doing this everywhere in Vietnam, then that is no longer quite such a terrifying prospect, and it's also far less demonizing of the soldiers doing it, because that's just what people do. Hey, in this world, people in Vietnam just play that game. They just love it. Why the hell not?
Even if you just want to make the argument that it's not something that people in Vietnam do, which it's not, that
which it's not.
Let's just say that it's not. But that's what I think Cimino is implying, is that there is this culture of barbaric stuff happening here, even outside of the kind of battlefield, and I don't think that's a fair representation at all. It's a really problematic representation, I think. But also, just the fact that it happens at all, like you say, outside of the prison camp, undermines the horror that they went through. Because there are, you can, I'd say, count on both hands the amount of time somebody pulls an empty chamber. Even De Niro does it to John Cazale's character, Stan. They're in the cabin and he pulls the gun to him and he pulls the trigger. I'm like, you could have just killed him. And okay, fine, that's the power of that moment, but it's yet another empty chamber. Like, how many people actually die from being shot in these, in this movie, versus the people who survive Russian roulette? It is very, very out of balance, I think. And I don't think you need the third act Russian roulette mechanisms in order to create that mirroring, as you say, of, like, there is that wonderful thing, which I didn't actually, to be honest, I didn't pick up on this viewing, actually, until you said it. That wonderful philosophy of one shot kills. It's important, one shot. Don't screw around with this. These are wildlife. These aren't toys. One shot kills, right? And then it's the one shot kill in the prison camp. And I love that. I think that's amazing. You're now the prey. And it's the one shot philosophy coming back to you. That's masterful. That really is. Like, these are, you can tell there are screenwriters here at the helm.
Yeah.
Until they actually put Michael Cimino at the helm. You don't need the reinforcement of Russian roulette. Russian roulette happened in that. It was this horrific thing that happened in this prison camp. Like, these are really profound experiences that they went through. But in De Niro's case, it was, and in Christopher Walken's case, it was this particular thing.
Yeah, the one thing that.
And I don't think you needed to overplay that hand.
No, I agree. I think that if you were to remove that mechanism in there and get down and distill it to your sort of 2 hours of great cinema, and maybe extend some of those Vietnam sequences, it works really well. And because I feel like what this film is trying to do is to show you who they were before, who they are during, and who they are afterwards, and show through a long, kind of protracted and difficult watch exactly what the horror of war is. And if that's what the purpose of this film is, and I think it's a fair assessment, then again the Russian roulette angle on this undermines it. Like you're saying, it does, because it takes away from, because it makes you, it does, I'm repeating what you've said, but it you're right, it does undercut the message of the movie, which is a bit of a shame. I do think, on balance, there's, to kind of come back around to the kind of the pros of the screenwriting thing here. There is I'm getting big time shades of The Godfather knocking around in this. Like the for example, apart from anything else, the the introduction, that first act, the wedding, the protracted thing, these long shots. I think The Godfather is as we've discussed, and check out our rewatch of that if you fancy it. The Godfather is a masterful and very deliberate uh, lengthening of things, and there isn't any fat on that screenplay. It takes a long time over things because it needs to take a long time over things.
No, but I don't
Whereas,
want to be that guy who says movies are too long, and I'm like, I sound like I'm twice my age or something. But it's, uh, I don't care that The Dark Knight is 2.5 hours long. It holds my attention. I don't care that Return of the King is 4 hours, the extended edition or whatever. It holds my attention. The Godfather, you made the comparison to The Wedding. The difference between the wedding in Act 1 of The Godfather and the wedding in Act 1 of this film is that the wedding in The Godfather is a staging ground for other things to happen. This is not a staging ground for anything we didn't already get prior to the wedding actually happening, which is maybe a few minutes into, about 20 minutes into the film. We already get the relationship. We already get where people stand. We already know how people feel about everything. They've come in way too early. And then the wedding itself is not a staging ground for other drama to happen or other plot points or anything to unfold. The most interesting thing for me that happens at the wedding is when the Green Beret, the PTSD-stricken Green Beret, sits down at the bar and is just like, doesn't care. And they're almost offended because they're meeting their hero, so to speak. And he's not what they thought. And De Niro gets quite offended by it. What do you say? What do you say? And it's very shades of Goodfellas and other kind of scenes like that where, people are, but you've got to do more with those scenes or you just cut them. Yeah, that's the thing. I'm not against long films. I'm just against wasting my time.
So then, John, we've examined, we've looked through, we've chatted away here. The big question coming to you now, and it is a big question: does this film belong in the script department vaults currently located in the mountains of Pennsylvania, being hunted over by Robert De Niro?
Okay. I know I've been criticizing this film throughout. I think this is a masterpiece of cinema. I do not think this is an expertly crafted screenplay.
Interesting. Okay.
I think there are movies like The Godfather where, to me, the majority of the magic is in the writing. And it is just easy as all hell for great actors to just make that work. And it's just easy for the director to be able to, to be able to put it up on screen. There are plenty of examples where the screenplay is only one part of a bigger puzzle of collaborators, where the cinematographer is making it work visually. The director is making it all come together on screen. The actors are just making that, maybe average dialogue come alive. And the script plays a pivotal, but is not the defining feature of the movie. I think Chinatown is an example where the script is the defining feature of the movie, for example.
Yeah.
I don't think the script is the defining thing, the defining factor of this movie. I think it is De Niro, Streep, Casale, and the rest of the cast, Walken as well in particular, doing incredible work. I think they make those characters. I think Cimino letting the camera run at the wedding might be too long for my taste, but it makes those characters, it gives those characters dimension that they might not have otherwise from just reading the script. So if we're talking about the film as a whole, then by all means, it's worthy of its place as one of the all-time great classics. But from a screenwriting point of view, I think there are better explorations out there from a screenwriting point of view of the kind of things that this film is trying to explore.
Yeah. So we need to look at the rules of admission to the script department vaults then.
I think so.
Because are we looking at the film as a whole, or are we looking at it from a screenplay point of view? I would argue that this film is going to be put in other people's general film vaults, it will be saved there. So perhaps we should be more discerning from I mean, this is nonsense, isn't it? But maybe we should be more discerning from a screenwriting point of view. If you want to say no, John, I will respect it.
The hate I'm gonna get if I say no. Look, like I said, there's 2 hours of pure gold screenwriting.
Okay,
This film
all right.
wrapped up in 3 hours of a very cold blanket, a very cold, harsh blanket, that is at times difficult to find comfort in. And I think, yes, put it in there,
but with the caveat that only 2 hours of it is good.
No, because even that sounds a bit too harsh. I don't know. I think if you cut out the stuff, I know you just want a yes or no from me, but I just feel like if you trim it down, I do feel you will lose all of the wonderful characters, because I don't think they're I don't think those characters are embedded in the script. I think those characters are wonderful, wonderful creations of a brilliant cast, allowed to have fun with their craft because of Cimino as a director. But I also think that I'm looking at my watch from time to time, and I shouldn't be, because Cimino's allowing people to have too much fun. And he's allowed to have too much fun. And he's not reeling it in a bit. So that's my only thing. Let it in, but
we'll put it in the basement.
As brazen as this sounds, I think he could have done better.
Oh, I love it. I agree on balance. I'm a little bit more favorable. I again, it's probably the slight masochist in me that enjoys having to slog through some films sometimes for the sake of the art of it, I suppose. So if I look at this as as more of an art house project, then yes, 100% it goes in for me without question. I agree with you on pretty much everything. I just don't struggle quite so much with it. But
I'm glad you said art. Yeah. It is a wonderful piece of art. It really is.
It is.
It really is. It is a wonderful piece of art.
Yeah. It's a portrait. I would look at this as a portrait of post-traumatic stress disorder in the Vietnam War. That would be my kind of reading of this, and I think for what it sets out to do there, it does it really, really well. Though I would agree with you, I think there are other projects that have done it better over less time with less bloat. But that's a conversation for another
Before
day.
We wrap up,
yeah, of course.
Is it just me, or did you see? Sorry, just gonna have to pull up Bradley Cooper. Is Bradley Cooper the modern day De Niro in terms of his like demeanor and everything? Like, there are moments where I'm watching De Niro in this, and I'm like, that's Bradley Cooper. Like, I'm like, and I know people have made comparisons to Bradley Cooper as a young De Niro, as the modern day young De Niro, let's say. But I'm seeing it. Like, I'm really seeing it in that film. I'm like, it's almost, there are moments where just there's this subtle gesture. I'm like, I wonder, did Bradley Cooper study? I mean, he is obviously a student of De Niro, but
absolutely,
but it does feel like he's really a student of De Niro, actually.
Yeah, I can see that. I wouldn't have picked up on it had you not said it, I don't think. But yeah, I do. I kind of
next time you're watching,
I'm gonna watch some more Bradley.
Next time watching Bradley Cooper, just see if you pick up on some of De Niro's performance quirks. Let's say I'm not saying
De Niroisms.
De Niroisms. Yeah, I'm not saying that Bradley Cooper's just stealing from De Niro, but I think he is a student of De Niro, and he's learned, and he has worked with De Niro several times, I believe, and so I think that's not cool. I think some of De Niro has rubbed off on Bradley Cooper, which is intended to be a compliment, So
absolutely, I will look into that. That's so interesting. Perhaps we should do a De Niro Cooperisms off, but with a better name.
You'll have to find the screenwriting value in that, otherwise I'm not in.
Ah, that's true. Yeah.
Sorry,
that's very true.
For a different podcast.
That's for a different podcast. Well, maybe we should just start a podcast that's just all about Robert De Niro and Bradley Cooper and how they're similar.
I feel like I killed the momentum of this ending.
I mean, I'm into it. I liked it. And ultimately, Bradley Cooper can also go in my vaults anytime. So that's okay. Thanks, John. That was fun. If you guys are interested in watching any other rewatch episodes, we have a whole series of these. We referenced The Godfather a couple of times in there, so you can go back and see what we thought of that. There are various other things in there as well. If you want to watch this, then it's available currently on Apple TV, I believe.
No, it's not. I purchased it, and you have access to it.
That's why I have access to it. There we go.
So it is not on Apple.
It's
TV,
available.
No.
It's available to rent from various streaming platforms. And if you want to watch Bradley Cooper, then I think I would highly recommend you do so. And let us know whether you think he is in fact similar to.
I think Nightmare Alley is where he's being quite De Niro.
Save it for the podcast, John.
Yeah, anyway.
Save it for the podcast. We've got a whole thing. It's going to be amazing.
Okay.
But until next time, or in the Robert De Niro Bradley Cooperisms podcast, we will see you.
It's
next
not
time.
a real
Thanks very
podcast.
much. Bye-bye.
It's not a real podcast.
It's a real podcast. I want to do it.
All right.
Bye.